Welcome to the Geek Bits Podcast with your hosts, Mike, David, and Craig. So, welcome to the Geek Bits Podcast, episode number 5. In this episode, we're going to talk about when the science is wrong in TV shows and movies. We're going to pick a lot on science fiction shows, but it's obviously not exclusive to science fiction shows. Lots of TV shows and movies can get stuff wrong. But I want to start off with talking about why is it even important? Because I can't tell you how many times I've started talking to somebody after going to see a movie with somebody, and I'll start talking about some of the science they got wrong, and the person will get really irritated with me. My wife is an excellent example. She gets really, really annoyed. She's like, why can't you just forget about that and just enjoy the movie? And so I wanted to maybe try to illustrate what the problem is a little bit for the average person. So give me an example of like a movie that everybody knows of that's not fantasy and not sci-fi, like where the science is supposed to be right, you know?
Man, normally I would go with Pulp Fiction, but I think today I'm going to go with Die Hard.
Die Hard, okay. I'm sure everybody knows Die Hard, right? So, okay, all right. So what about that scene at the very end where Hans Gruber is like hanging out of the window and he's about to fall? John McClane is I think there's like a watch or something. He's trying to get off of a lady, and he falls. Now, what if you're watching that, instead of him falling to his death, what if he just falls a little bit and then starts flying around like Superman and flies back in the window and starts fighting John McClane again? And then worse than that, like none of the other characters in the movie even notice there's anything unusual about that. Like they just accept that as like, oh, that's normal.
He's just in the Matrix.
Yeah.
He woke up and
so, you know, if you saw that, it would kind of ruin the movie for a lot of people, I think, because hey, that doesn't make any sense.
Well,
That's not possible.
I always kind of equate it like this with those types of things, because to me there's like your typical drama action type movies, right? Then there's science fiction and there's fantasy. And a lot of times fantasy and science fiction, those lines are blurred.
Right.
But Star Trek has a lot of fantasy.
It does.
It
does.
There's some mind-body dualism I'm sure we'll get into, theoretically mind-body dualism is fantasy.
Yeah, I will totally give you that. But when I look at a movie and it's supposed to be science, not fantasy, then I expect it to hold up a little bit better. And again, like you talked about Die Hard. Die Hard's not a fantasy movie, so therefore there shouldn't be any
even
Superman flying
around. Movies, I get annoyed if they're not consistent. Like there should be a science of the fantasy movie, like Harry Potter. It's like, well, wands do certain things, somebody mentioned recently the Quidditch game makes no sense, but that's another story.
So what we're saying is there has to be some rules that
there has to be rules in order to really enjoy it, because like to your point, it's like if there are no rules in the movie, even if there's science fiction-y rules that we haven't discovered yet, or they just blatantly ignore a law of physics, then it just feels unreal.
So an example of that. Star Trek, for example, has established this rule within the franchise that it's considered canon that you cannot beam through shields, and yet they've done it in a number of episodes.
They've also beamed
in a lot of episodes.
They also beamed like at warp or like across distances that would normally take hundreds of years. Like the newer movies, like we're just like, oh yeah, we're going to beam you to the other side of the galaxy or something like that, and so all the Trekkies freaked out.
But yeah, you're right. So within the framework of that show, they should have their own rules that they should follow, but the writers don't always follow them. They don't always remember. And a lot of the times the audience just doesn't notice.
Do you know, this is something I've actually wondered about for a long time. Do you think that's because there's different writers writing different episodes and they just don't? Yeah, that's what I think it is most of the time.
Absolutely. So, so what we want to do is we first want to pick on just some shows and movies and stuff as, being terrible examples of things that are wrong. And then I think we should kind of follow this back up and talk about some TV shows and movies that get it right.
Yeah.
And
I love it.
And that way we can kind of have a contrast. Now, I don't want to pick on Star Trek specifically because, you know, obviously there's hundreds and hundreds of episodes and lots of different writers. And I love Star Trek. And overall, I think for the most part, Star Trek gets it right. But obviously there's some episodes where they don't.
Yep.
So
I actually do kind of want to pick on Star Trek, but it's just out of love. It's just like,
yeah. Well, I want to pick on Doctor Who a little bit too. So.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll let you.
Yeah. So I'll go first, I guess, because I have like it's like I don't know. Again, like you said, I love Star Trek, and I've watched like almost every episode of every season of all the different series except for Deep Space Nine
for some bizarre reason.
You have to watch Deep Space Nine for the love.
I have. I get about 2/3 of the way
There's
through.
There's two rules to Deep Space Nine. One, ignore any episode that's all about the Ferengi.
Oh,
and
yeah.
Two, ignore any episode that has Lawaxana Troy.
Oh, yeah. I actually ignore all of those and all of basically any episode that Majel Barrett stars in. I don't like. Okay, but so there's this episode of The Next Generation that I like to pick on all the time because it drives me nuts because every time I watch it, I just want to pull my freaking eyeballs out of their sockets and flush them down the toilet. And that is, it's called The Next Phase, I think. And it's where the one where Geordi and Ro, they think they died in an explosion on a ship, but what actually happened is that they got phased, so they're in a different phase from everybody else.
Whatever that means. Like,
and so, yeah, I want to find out if the writers, like, and the people that made this episode are still around and call them and ask them what the hell they were thinking. So let's start with the fact that they're phased out and they can't be seen, right? But nobody can see them,
right?
But they can see everybody else. Now, Now maybe there's some physics of that. We could
maybe
argue.
the light crosses,
the light boundaries cross some dimensional thing that we don't know about. So I'm going to let that one go.
Photons are weird. We could
photons are weird. Just like maybe it's ultraviolet light. Like it shifted in that direction or something. Okay, fine, but it still doesn't make any sense. The other thing, the thing though that drives me like the farthest up the wall with that episode though, is that they immediately, like at the very beginning of the episode, they make it very clear that they can walk through walls, they can walk through consoles, that other people can walk right through them.
They knock that one Romulan out the window.
They kick
he
this
just
one.
Goes right through.
He goes right through the wall and right out the ship. Now, apparently, the walls of the ship and the floorboards of the ship are in a different phase because they don't fall through the floors, and they should. And really, what I think should happen, it's the second that they got phased wrong, the ship should have just kept flying, and they should have just been floating in space because the ship would have just left them behind because they can't touch anything, and that includes the floorboards, the decks of the ship. So that episode, and I could probably sit here and think of a few more things about it that drove me nuts.
Yeah, I'll throw a few out there. So at the end of the movie, Geordi is eating because he's very hungry, and one of the things that occurred to me immediately when I was watching that scene,
I know exactly where you're going.
Yeah, he couldn't touch the food to eat it, but he was able to breathe the air.
Yes,
in the ship, and even if he could breathe the air, he should have at least been able to walk up to somebody and blow on them or something, or they should have been able to hear his voice or something like that. So the fact that they could breathe opens up a whole can of worms that they should have been able to find some way to communicate with.
Yeah, they didn't fall through the floor. They could see things. They could breathe. Is there anything else? Any other way we can cut this to shit?
Oh, I can imagine here.
They go up. Don't they go up the turbo?
Oh yes,
the turbo lift.
They do. So why does the turbo lift just go up and leave them standing where they were?
Yeah. So now, admittedly, I did like that episode, even though I was annoyed by some of the
bad science,
because they had some interesting metaphysical things going on in that episode, psychological things going on in that episode. Because Ro thought she was dead, and there was some interesting story to be had there. And the thing that irritates me though about these kind of mistakes, and not always, but in like 90% of the cases where I watch a movie or TV show like this that has bad science, they could have fixed the science without changing the story.
I agree, and I think a lot of times they could just tell the story. Like if they had just if they had just explained that, oh, well, this is a Romulan phase thing that they built, and there's, nanites or something that hold them to the floor or whatever. They had made an excuse. They didn't even bother to make an excuse.
They kind of did that. I don't know if you remember the episode where they go into like some kind of time bubbles, and the Enterprise, and again, it's the Romulans, I think. They're always the Romulans. What's up with them? But they, the two ships look like they're fighting each other, but they're frozen in time.
Right, I remember that.
Well, they have to get a special like device.
That's right. That's
puts
right.
Kind
I
of a
forgot
bubble
about that.
around
Yes,
them.
that puts them in that. Yes.
Right.
So that they can interact, but like still breathe air and still walk through the ship and everything. So the time is flowing correctly for them, but they can still interact with everything around them, and it still screws them up, like their metabolism or something. Mm-hmm. Like Picard has a little freak out session, which I thought. I mean, Patrick Stewart, just the best actor ever. He's just like,
Well, yeah, exactly. And I bet you whoever originally wrote that script, I'm just guessing here, probably didn't have that in there. And somebody probably looked at it and said, this isn't right. We need to figure out a way to make this work with the script and the science. And they probably came up with the little bracelet things or whatever they were wearing.
I did have one nitpick thing on that episode. We could go back to the other episode, but just while I'm thinking about it, there's a part where I think it's Picard goes to touch the fruit that's rotten.
And like a bubble goes through.
Yeah, and he puts his hand through it, and his nails grow really fast, and he's like hurting. I was like, no, dude, you're going like hours without circulation, or days, who knows? Like your hand should be withered away
and turn black and falling off.
In fact, that's something that irritates me about any number of shows, and this has happened in Doctor Who, it's happened in Star Trek, it's happened in all kinds of shows where somebody gets put in time, like in aged, like they go into some kind of thing.
There's the episode where the Doctor gets put in a cage and aged like thousands and thousands of years or something, and he's like this little like a hermit looking thing. And it's like, well, he didn't eat that whole time. He didn't like there's.
Well, that's a little bit different.
And what show was that?
It was, I forget, the Master put the Doctor in a cage, and I forget the whole.
That's a little bit different type of aging, though. I kind of got the impression the Master was just messing with his DNA or something like that. I don't know that he necessarily had
an experience.
Oh, I thought he was. They sped up time on that one. Okay, maybe I have that one wrong. I'll pass.
Yeah, he should have.
It could be, but point is, number of shows have done this where someone has gone into a room or been put through some kind of beam or something and then they come out and they're much older. And I'm like, well, they would have had to experience the passage of time. They would have had to eat. They would have to breathe and all this kind of stuff. And, clearly that doesn't happen. Yeah, the scene with Picard's hand's a perfect example. That flesh should have been dead.
Right.
Necrotic.
It should have been. He should have come back with bones sticking out of his
I did love that Picard... in the engine room, there's all this smoke that's frozen in time, and he makes a smiley face. I was like, I would have totally done that.
Yeah. So, let's pick on a few more episodes. So, I want to talk about an episode of, actually, it was a movie, Star Trek Generations. And in this particular movie, the bad guy sends a torpedo of some kind to the star. I would say sun, but technically speaking, sun only applies to our star. And I know a lot of science fiction movies get that
why our star system is called the solar system.
Yes, because our star is called Sol.
But isn't that kind of culturally relative? Like, if you're an alien living on your own planet, to you, maybe that star is your sun.
Well, right? Yeah, but like they may call their son Ball, let's say, instead of Sol, and so that would be the baller system.
Everybody wants to go to the baller system.
But yeah, quite often in Star Trek or other science fiction shows, you'll hear them use the term solar system when talking about some other star system besides ours. But that's actually inaccurate because ours is the only solar system.
Yeah. But we're getting off of your
But anyway, okay, so there's this, I think it's called the Armagosa star or something like that. And he fires this torpedo and it causes it to go supernova. Now, that in and of itself is, who knows like what this particular torpedo has. It's obviously some kind of fictional technology. I'm not going to argue with that because that's the fantasy part of the show. But what we do know is the star goes supernova. And when it does, the planet immediately becomes dark. And yet we know that it takes minutes for the photons to travel.
Assuming it's a Class M planet is the similar distance to Earth.
Well, they were breathing and walking around on it, same gravity.
Yeah, so it's got to be in the habitable zone of that star. So it's got to be a similar distance from that Earth is. So yeah, it should take several minutes for them to notice the sun went out. It shouldn't happen immediately. But even if you could chalk that up to like, that's just the way that it was edited.
So we're missing a point here, though, that I want to make for the people listening to make sure they completely understand. It takes about 8.5 minutes for a photon to get from our sun to the surface of the planet Earth. And so if something happened on the sun, we wouldn't see it for 8.5 minutes.
Right. We would continue to see the sun in the sky.
Just exactly.
I think in the name of science, they should have just kept taping Picard and the bad guy just sitting there. All right, it's the 8 minutes done before he goes dark. Did it work?
But then it gets worse than that, because the Enterprise has to warp in order to get out of the way of the debris field coming from this supernova. Now, the light, of course, travels at the speed of light, which takes 8.5 minutes. But the debris field is going to be traveling way slower.
Any fraction of that.
Right, so it could take days or weeks for that debris field to hit the Enterprise.
They could have just leisurely coasted away.
Exactly. And so so that was something that the writers clearly got wrong. Now I understand it was more dramatic the way that they wrote it.
Yeah.
And the average viewer probably didn't notice anything wrong with that, but I did, and it was annoying.
I did not pick up on that. I remember watching it. I did not pick up on either of those two things, but it was a long while back.
Yeah, so let's see what else is on my list here. So, I'm just gonna touch on a couple of not specific episodes, but just a couple of recurring themes I see in various shows that irritate me to no end. First of all, sound in space. We know that when ships blow up, we shouldn't hear anything because sound doesn't travel in a vacuum.
I actually feel whenever I see a science fiction show where a ship blows up in space and it's silent, like to me, it's like. It's even more horrifying. Like you're in a more alien environment.
There is a movie that did that.
Gravity.
Was it Gravity?
Yeah.
Gravity. Okay. Yeah. All this debris is flying around,
and it's completely silent. Yeah.
And it was kind of horrific. But that's the way it would have really been. So we'll talk about that one later. So sound in space is one thing. Artificial gravity. So, artificial gravity is something that annoys me, and I know why they do it, because obviously it makes it easier to produce the shows. The budget is much less if you don't have to.
If everybody on the Enterprise had to be floating around, the cost of the show would go.
And then,
or they all had to have boots where they're like,
clank.
Just trying.
Or if they had to redesign the ship so that it was circular, so that it could spin for that sort of gravity, then it would, the ship wouldn't look as cool. There's all these things that they take into account when they're trying to come up with these shows, and unfortunately gravity is just one of those things that's just too inconvenient for them to deal with. But I do think it's funny, and so I'll like, okay, so in Star Trek they have gravity plating, which is what they've come up with to explain how gravity on their ships work, and that's fine. I can accept that. It's a fictional piece of technology.
And in one of the Star Trek movies, they blow out the gravity plating.
Star
They
Trek
are
6.
floating around.
Star Trek 6,
the Klingon one.
Yep, they lost power and everybody starts floating.
Undiscovered country, right?
Yep, that's the one. And I actually liked that. I thought that was pretty cool that they showed that, because how many times have we seen, and I could probably pick 4 or 5 episodes off the top of my head of both Voyager and The Next Generation, where they have a complete and total power failure.
Yep.
And they'll, like, all the lights are off, all the computers are off, the engines are off, everything. And they'll literally say, all systems are down, there's no power to anything. But they still have gravity.
Where are you going to get gravity, sir? Where's that gravity coming from? I think this is unrealistic.
They'll even tell you life support's down. Yeah. But they still have gravity.
But they still have gravity. Those are special extra backups, like triple redundant.
Yeah, I guess. So, that kind of thing annoys me.
You don't need to breathe, but we're going to hold you on the floor.
And on a similar note to that, and again, this is one of those things that's just too inconvenient, is the language barrier, because clearly aliens shouldn't be speaking English on their home planet unless we invaded them and forced them to speak English or something like that. But so they come up with this thing, the artificial or the Universal Translator,
right?
And it's annoying because the way it's portrayed is
It doesn't make a lick of sense.
No, it doesn't. And there was even this one.
I think the Babelfish was the better way.
Yeah.
The Babelfish.
Just to get in your ear.
Yeah.
Yeah, or in
It's
Farscape,
psychological.
they did the little microbes in your brain.
Well, that's what Doctor Who does. The TARDIS puts
that's like a telepathic thing in Doctor Who. So they've got their explanations and whatnot. But the Universal Translator in Star Trek is irritating because apparently it happens through their comm badge. And so in theory, that means the way it would really work, like somebody would talk and you would still hear them speaking in their native tongue, and then you would hear their language coming out of the comm badge. Now, they don't portray this to the audience, but there was one episode.
Also, little nitpick, when the Ferengi or the Klingon or whoever is talking, their mouth is moving to English. Right. So they should look kind of like, I don't know, an old dubbed movie, like a Kung Fu movie or something like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, they should. That's a good point. I hadn't thought about that. So, but there was this one episode of Enterprise that drove me crazy because he was on, Captain Archer was down on this planet that's a pre-industrial planet, and he's interacting with this woman, and then his translator quits working, and suddenly he can't understand anything she's saying, and she can't understand anything he's saying. So he kisses her to try to distract her from what's really going on. And while he's kissing her, he's got his little tricorder thing or whatever. He's poking buttons on her or trying to reboot it or whatever. And then once it's fixed, he starts talking to her again. And the thing about it is, like, you know what? That's ridiculous because if it was really the thing doing the translating, she's going to notice that he's not speaking her language. Like the moment that she starts talking to him. And because she's from a pre-industrial society, she wouldn't think, like, a Ferengi wouldn't think anything of it. They're used to it if they're in Federation space, having to deal with translators. But she wouldn't have been. She would have noticed something the moment he spoke to her.
She wouldn't have any clue. In fact, it would be sort of like magic or something.
Yeah. Like, where is this extra voice coming from that I hear in my language and, or whatever. There's only been a few movies that have kind of gotten that right. And I think the original Stargate got that right pretty well. Now, ironically, not the SG-1, the TV series, and I think they must have realized, hey, this is too tedious for the viewer to have to deal with this in each and every episode with the language barrier. So they just got rid of that. Everybody speaks English in SG-1.
Yeah.
And then, on a similar note,
I was just going to say, on one of the things I think about sci-fi shows that when it comes to language that kind of bothers me is, and I think the same thing with evolution. Like, everybody looks like a human with a different head, like in Star Trek. Same thing with language and with speaking and all of that. Like it might be an insect race, and the way they talk is clicking their little things together on the end of their their little, what do they call them?
Mandibles.
Thank you. Clicking their mandibles together. That might be how they speak. So, but you never see any of that or in Star Trek, or
very rarely.
Yeah. But what you do see is a crazy alien race that speaks by metaphor.
Right.
Yeah.
And
which is absolutely stupid.
It is.
This is more like less about physics or anything like that, but more sociological. You mentioned, was it Captain Archer kissing somebody?
Yeah.
All these aliens kiss people. Okay, we know kissing is not a universal norm even for humans.
Even like on our planet with like other animals don't really do that. I mean,
Right, but even humans don't do that universally, and even the ones that do, some of them just kiss like their children, but they don't kiss their spouse or their significant other or anything like that. So like, why are all these aliens kissing?
Kirk had to have somebody to make out with.
And, well, it brings me to Riker, who's basically the sexual equivalent of Kirk.
He's the TNG of Kirk. I mean, he is.
He's out banging every alien out there, and it's like, well, including one that was androgynous. Like, it was way ahead of the time. It was like kind of like speaking to trans people and stuff like that, and kind of addressing that issue. But
Star Trek was far ahead of its time, and a lot of those types of
very progressive from the original series on. But people's naughty bits were going to be different from one alien to another.
Same thing. We were talking about the language and all that. Yeah, it's like the naughty bits probably don't look or function anything like ours.
Right. Maybe caressing someone is considered like a handshake or something like that.
The Ferengi have their lobes that they like.
Yeah, that is different. Yes.
But that reminds me of I don't know why, but this is a funny story. Men in Black. There's the I don't remember which. I think it's the second movie.
The Ballchinian.
The Ballchinian. You remember this?
No.
So, for those who don't know, and for Craig, there's a race in the Men in Black where literally there's a ball sack hanging from their racer's chin.
Lovely.
And so
Peter Griffin race.
like Will Smith's character. Do you remember his name? In the
Agent
J. Yeah. He kicks this guy in the crotch, and the guy's like, nothing happens. And then one of the other guys, Agent K or somebody, says he's a Ballchinian. Kicks him in the chin, and all of a sudden he's like, "Is it dead? Deathly."
Yeah. Well, he had like something covering it.
Yeah, like a neck, like a scarf or something around.
He pulls it down, and you can see the sack there, and then he hits it, and the guy's like, "Ah!"
I do not remember that part at all.
The Ballchinian.
Yeah.
So yes, the naughty bits might be completely different.
They did do that in one of the Star Trek movies. It might have been Undiscovered Country again, where they're in the prison thing, like the frozen prison wasteland, and Kirk like kicks the guy in the shins, and that's where his sex organ.
That is exactly right. I forgot all about.
So good
Craig.
on them for having some like biological diversity in there. It's like would make all the sense in the world.
Yeah, I think Kirk walked away saying something like, oh, "Thank God he had shins" or something like that, and the other alien said that was not his shin.
This is just in passing. This is just a small nitpicky thing, but I see a lot of movies do this wrong, and it relates to time travel, which we talked about the time bubbles from Star Trek, but actual time travel. And this is not, I guess you could consider it partially a sci-fi movie. Like, let's see, it involves time travel, incest, and your mom's potential rapist being your butler, basically. So do you know what movie I'm talking about?
Afraid not.
Oh, come on.
I mean, I'm probably going to put two and two together here in a second.
1950s, Back to the Future.
I was going to say, are you talking about, I was just about to say, are you talking about Back to the Future? But I'm not fully getting that out of, okay, so you have to explain it.
So, it's a time travel movie, but Biff tries to rape Marty's mom.
Yeah.
We could do a whole episode on Back to the Future, just FYI. But, and then he becomes a butler in the end, which is like, as a kid, I never really thought of this stuff as weird. But like later in life, it's like, that's horrifying. Like this guy tried to rape his mom, and then he's working in their garage and washing the car and stuff like that. So there's like an almost rape scene, and then almost incest with the mom. But we'll just ignore all of those weirdness and just talk about the science part that they got wrong, which is the time travel part, right? So you have this vehicle that for some reason has to go to 89 miles an hour, 88 miles an hour, and then it'll go through time. So it drives up, and the flames come out, and it goes through time. Okay, and then it ends up in exactly the same spot 50 years in the past or 30 years in the past that it was before. But meanwhile, the Earth should have been rotating around the sun, and the Earth should have been turning.
And the sun is moving through the galaxy.
And the sun is moving through the galaxy. Yeah. So he should have been in space.
So I actually said this. My wife, we were talking the other night. Funny that you bring this up. We're just randomly talking over a glass of wine the other night, and she said, I wonder, I forget exactly. Oh, was it at the lake? She said, I wonder what would be here, like on this spot 1,000 years ago, if we just went back in time, if we could flick our hands and, or snap our fingers and be back in time. And I said, what would be right here is the vastness of space.
Right.
So I've considered this before, and I'm not sure I can really hold this against them because, first of all, we don't really. Time travel itself is a fictional thing.
Right.
It's probably not possible, and if it is, we don't know how it would work. That being said, Einstein believes that large objects like the Earth warp space-time, so it's possible that it somehow is like an anchor point.
Maybe the flux capacitor had a way to hook on to where the Earth was
I don't know.
time, and
like I said, I won't hold that against them, but I have considered that before.
Yeah, I always consider that any time machine, like the TARDIS, for example, if we want to pick on a more sophisticated time machine, isn't just a time machine. It's a time and space machine.
Which the TARDIS literally is.
Yeah. Of course, the 88 miles per hour part makes no sense because you're like, 88 miles per hour relative to what? I mean,
and you have plutonium in your back seat, so you have plenty of energy. Like that extra boost in speed, that's not getting you through the light barrier or anything.
They
like
needed
that.
something good for the script,
right?
That's all.
The original script, it was supposed to be a refrigerator, if you don't recall.
Oh, I forgot about it. That sounds familiar.
Yeah, and they actually changed it because they said they were afraid a lot of kids would lock themselves in refrigerators and get stuck.
Wow!
So they decided to change it to a car.
Also, did not originally star Michael J. Fox. I forget who the other actor was, but they did many scenes. You can watch them on the internet. Totally different actor. And he's
they tried
actor.
to pilot it and see how it was going to work.
Well, they planned on using him for the whole movie, and all the jokes fell flat. Whereas Michael J. Fox was just better in that comedic role, and just his kind of like nervous energy and stuff like that. Yeah.
You know what? Now I know what I'm going to do when I get home tonight. I'm going to go try to
You
look
should
that up.
watch that. It's like
So I'd like to switch gears now and talk about some of the movies that get the science at least mostly right. And I have a number of movies I want to talk about, but I want to start off talking about War Games. And there's a certain irony to War Games because when I first saw the movie as a kid, I was like 11, 12, something like that when I first saw it. I was actually really annoyed because they got a number of computer-related facts wrong.
So I want to ask, like you mentioned, your wife gets annoyed at you when you talk about all the science things wrong. When you talk about the science or the computer things that get wrong, does she always get annoyed at you? Because like I do that all the time. I'll be we were watching a new Free Guy.
Oh, Free Guy! I just watched that.
Yeah, watched that.
So David, I don't think you've seen it.
I haven't seen it yet.
He's real simply put. He realizes that he's a NPC in a, you know what an NPC is, like a non-player character, like he's like
in a video game.
In a video game.
Yeah, I've seen the trailer.
Yeah, okay.
But they started talking about code and programming and stuff like that, and then at the end, the guy is like smashing the servers. I'm like, that's not going to do the job. Like I'm just listing all these computer
like they don't
things
have a backup data center either.
Right. And I'm like, this is not, I was like, that's not how that works. And my wife looks at me and goes, honey, did they get the geek stuff wrong? I was like, yes, they did.
Yes, they
got
did.
it wrong. They got all the code stuff wrong.
So, okay. Well, I'm going to be watching that soon. So
it's pretty funny, but it's not great. I mean, it's got a lot of good laughs, but it's not perfect.
So War Games, when I first saw it, I didn't like it because a number of computer facts were presented wrong. Just some off the top of my head. The modem noise was wrong. It was like doo-doo-doo-doo-doo-doo, and it really should have been like beep or whatever. That is pretty minor, but still it annoyed me because I knew it was wrong. But I think the bigger one was he was war dialing from an acoustic coupler modem. For those that don't know, that's the kind of modem where you take the phone handset and you stick it in this device that basically has microphone and speakers and whatnot. And to war dial, you have to be able to dial the phone. Now, theoretically, it could dial through, I guess, putting the DTMF tones to the phone handset, but there's no way to hang the phone up to dial the next.
You literally had to hit the switch.
Right. Yeah. So exactly. So
it's fine if you're calling a BBS or something like that. But you would have to
You'd have to hit the hook switch. It would have had to have had, like, to do what he did with it, there would have to be some kind of robotic thing that clicked the hook switch between every call.
So anyway, the irony is years later, I actually grew to like that movie because I realized as wrong as they got some of the things in the movie, it has stood the test of time as being one of the most accurate hacker movies out there because all the rest of them are so absolutely terrible.
Terrible. David and I were talking about
I can't watch a hacker movie. I'm like, no, wrong. I'm not a security expert. I'm like, I know that's wrong.
Yeah. David and I were talking about this the other day, and it's like all of the hacker movies these days are people taking their hands and like waving them around a screen or something, and like things just magically happen on the computer, or they're just typing and it's always the GUI. There's never a command line. They're just typing as fast as they can on the keyboard, and windows are just popping in and out, and that's how they hack. It's like. Did nobody go to like even the most basic computer class before they wrote this script?
I really like the Hollywood operating system or Hollywood OS.
Yeah.
Yes.
There's a firewall and a big skull and crossbones comes up and like.
Yeah. And I saw one the other day where Leslie was watching one of her doctor's shows, and they got a virus that locked them out of all their computers, and every single computer in the hospital had this big like skull and crossbones and a bunch of text saying, it was a ransomware. And I'm like, it wouldn't have worked that way. Like, I mean, it wouldn't take control of every single desktop. The server might have had like all the files be encrypted, but like I'm sure they did that for dramatic effect,
of course,
to show. But yeah, they always get it wrong when it comes to computers. They dumb it down so much.
I think a lot of that, though, I mean, I think you kind of nailed it. A lot of that is simply for dramatic effect. They have to have something to get the audience engaged, and maybe that's why they got to move their hands around and hack. I don't know.
And a window with DOS and Linux, it ain't sexy.
Oh yeah. Or a lot of times what I see, and you don't see this so much anymore, but you still do see it occasionally, is where it's the wrong operating system on a different computer. Like for example, you'll see they're clearly working on a Dell PC, but there's Mac OS running on it.
Right.
Yeah, I've seen that. Or I recently saw a show that had a Tesla in it, and when they got in and you heard the noise of the engine starting and then revving up, driving away. And I'm like...
That seems like a really obvious one.
That's
the whole point of Tesla is there's no combustion engine.
So, I mean, that was probably just an editing floor mistake.
But what did you like about War Games? Because that movie is very close to my heart.
I love that movie.
Yeah.
I mean, in so many
Matthew
ways.
Broderick
the fact that he was war dialing, and that's something that the average person wouldn't understand, but they kind of explained it in the movie. The fact that they were using modems and terminals, and the fact that they had, I don't know, I'm trying to... Actually, the scene with the payphone, I'm not sure if that would really work. I've heard conflicting stories on that. I know it wouldn't work with our payphones that we had here at that time because they already had dial tones when you picked them up. They were a newer type payphone, but other people have told me
where he does the thing with
the Coke tab. The tab.
Yeah, I have heard conflicting stories on that, and that's one thing. I actually hope to on one of the Geek Pub episodes do a kind of a payphone episode, and
so if anyone hasn't seen,
maybe I'll figure that out, and we'll do an update to this at some time.
If anybody hasn't seen the movie, he hacks a payphone, right, by unscrewing the speaker from the payphone. And takes a Coke tab, which was a little piece of metal that came off a Coke top, and placed it in there and screwed it back on. And then,
he used it to conduct electricity to the ground of the.
Yeah, what I think the equivalent of what he was doing was like the payphone, doesn't have not all the features are exposed. Like some of the buttons and stuff don't actually work until you put the quarter in, right?
Right.
On some old phones like that, and so I think the equivalent of is he was hitting the hook switch. That he couldn't otherwise get to.
It's basically like it thought a quarter had been put in there or something like that. And again, I'm not sure if that actually would work or not. That's something we need to investigate. Like I said, I know it wouldn't work on our payphones that we had here, but he was up in a different state or something like that. But I also like the scene with the little tape recorder where he recorded the DTMF tones and played them back. That would probably work in most circumstances. So I don't have a problem with that.
For sure.
So okay, moving along. So
let's in the interest of time move on to I think you had mentioned the Expanse. And maybe talk about how some science fiction shows have really, what I feel like have went out of their way to try to really get some of the science right.
Now, the Expanse does have some fictional technology.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But when it comes to physics, they tend to try pretty hard, I think, to get the physics right. So they don't have artificial gravity in the Expanse. They get around this a number of ways. So if they're in orbit around a planet or just floating in space, they have to wear magnetic boots. And if they're in flight, their ships are actually designed so that the floors and whatnot are of the correct orientation, that when the ship's engines are running and it's accelerating the craft at about 1G, they have gravity or the sensation of gravity from the acceleration. And then as they get about halfway to their destination, they stop the ship, everybody's weightless, they flip it around, and then they decelerate to the end point, and then they have gravity again the rest of the way. And so... I think that's pretty cool, and I've seen a number of episodes where gravity plays, or the lack thereof, plays an interesting role. Like there was one episode where had a lot of injured people, and they said your wounds won't heal in 0G, so they had to get them onto a ship that had centrifugal force so that they could get some artificial gravity for those people's wounds to heal, and a variety of other things like that.
I think the Expanse is probably one of the only sci-fi shows, other than maybe a little bit in Star Wars, but where the actual damage from a space fight is actually portrayed properly and visible to everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. Like when there's a hull breach, you see a hull breach. The air is blowing out of the ship. In fact, sometimes they decompress the ship before a battle so that they won't have to worry about that kind of thing. Which that's pretty neat. And then on Star Trek, of course, when there's a battle, the consoles just blow up.
or they shoot lightning bolts out of them or something.
Yeah, like I don't know why a computer
There's
screen.
so many Next Generation episodes where somebody is at a console or something and there is blue lightning coming out, which looks like the exact same lightning from the Highlander movie where they cut off the head and they take the other guy, Immortal's power. It was always blue lightning. There must have been like a company that just produced blue lightning special effects.
It's funny. So I actually watched a podcast, a video podcast. I can't remember the name of the guy, but he does special effects work. And he actually talked about they were talking about Terminator 2. Mm-hmm. And he said at the time in the 80s and 90s that's exactly what there was a software package that did this one special effect, and that's all it did. And so that's why so many movies shared the same special effect, is because they all bought that same software package.
Right.
Because remember, they didn't have Adobe After Effects or anything. Or what's the one they're using all the time now? It's the 3D animating software. Oh, I can't believe I can't remember the name of it.
It'll come
Blender.
Yeah.
So
that's always something that's annoyed me, and it's in every. Well, I don't know about some of the like Discovery and whatnot, but like all the classic Star Trek series, it's like a space battle, your consoles blow up. And people die from it too,
they're electrocuted or burned. It's like, do you not have safety mechanisms?
No, because have you ever seen a seatbelt on Star Trek?
Yeah, I mean,
and their chairs aren't even bolted to the floor.
Why would a computer blow up from
how much energy is going into that thing? Like, I get the engines are going to have the engine. If you're in the engine room, something might explode or whatever because you're getting beamed.
Yeah.
Yeah, but out of the like a navigation panel, like that shouldn't be anything more than an LCD screen with something about a Raspberry Pi behind it.
Yeah, and the computer is somewhere else, like down in the central core or the server room, if you will.
So why would that blow up?
And similar effect in Star Trek, the motion picture. There's V'ger's hacking the Enterprise computer, and we just said there's probably a computer core somewhere in the ship. But Spock stops V'ger from hacking by just going over and smashing the keyboard on the console in the bridge. like that would have anything to do with V'ger hacking the computer, which is
that's about as bad as Doctor Who waving a sonic screwdriver at the screen of a TV, which he's done, or a computer screen, which he's done in several episodes. Like there's any data there. Yeah,
I tried to rewatch Star Trek: The Motion Picture the other day.
It's horrible.
It's horrible.
Put me right to sleep.
It's horrible.
20 minutes.
You know what's funny? I actually loved that movie when I was 12 years old or something like that. And it's exactly the opposite of David is with War Games. The older I get, the more I despise that movie. Yeah. I mean, I really do.
It hasn't stood the test of time for a number of reasons. We could go into a whole podcast about that. But, what other movies have gotten it right? I'm going to throw Stargate out there, the original Stargate, at least when it comes to the language thing. As someone who studied language, I really enjoyed that movie when it came out. And I was so disappointed when SG-1 came out that they just brushed it aside and no longer dealt with the language issue anymore. And, so I liked that. Can we think of any other movies or that have got? Well, I'll tell you one. Of course, everybody knows 2001: A Space Odyssey, and they got a lot of stuff right. But the one I actually like better is 2010. And of course, it has
really good movie.
It has some fictional stuff in there too. They've still got the monolith and whatnot. But as far as like all the space stuff and all the physics and whatnot, they get it all right. And
I like where they're planning what they're going to do with the other ship. They got to use the other ship as a booster to move their ship and get it in the right trajectory. Yeah. And they have a pencil floating in the air, and they're like to show how it's going to get knocked out and stuff like that, because there's no gravity in the meeting room.
And they did the arrow braking, which at the time that movie came out had never been done before, but now it's commonplace. And
I think the remake of Battlestar Galactica got a lot of things right. Now hold on, I can tell you a bunch of things they screwed up too, but Craig mentioned, I think, that the Battlestar Galactica itself, they were really worried about it getting hacked by the Cylons, because that's what the Cylons did, was hack. They are computers, so they hacked computers. So they actually air gapped the main computer. There was one computer, was like the navigation computer. I can't remember what it was. There was one computer that Adama allowed to stay on the network, but everything had to be air gapped from it, so there couldn't be any cables or anything plugged into it, so that the Cylons couldn't get to it.
Which would make sense. They would have perfect wireless hacking for.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And I think there is isn't there one episode where they do have to use wireless networking for something, and they're immediately getting hacked by the Cylons.
Oh yeah, and they're like really frustrated about having to do it because they knew what was going to happen.
Except they have all those other ships that are in the ragtag fleet with them that are probably not.
Yeah, but they only communicate with those ships over voice.
But why aren't those ships getting hacked all the time?
Oh, well, yeah.
I mean,
I don't know.
After the Earth got destroyed, they're like, we're shutting all this networking down. Like, everybody turn off your Wi-Fi.
Like Steve Jobs, get up there. Everybody needs to turn their Wi-Fi off.
There's that one asshole in the plane, and it's like, damn it, now the Cylons have hacked us. You left your cell phone on during the flights.
Well, I think that about wraps us up. We're at our time today for this podcast. So if you want to find us on video, we're on YouTube. We are on all of the syndicated platforms. So you'll find us on Spotify and Pandora and anywhere else you can find a podcast, Apple iTunes, Google Podcasts, etc. See you in the next podcast.